An article on cast stone by Greaves, written for the Woman Engineer, performed by Kate Vigers for the centenary of the Women's Engineering Society. On every hand nowadays, industry is having to rehabilitate itself to meet new conditions, and nowhere does this hold good so much as in the oldest of them all, the stonemasons. Many factors have brought things to an acute crisis. The war intervened in this, as in many other trades, stopping the flow of young men coming forward to learn the craft. Since then, there has been a revolt amongst the young people entering occupations which are so arduous, unpleasant, and difficult. This leaves only amongst the stonemasons the few men who were there in pre-war days. Unfortunately, only a small percentage of these are worth very much after 40, as it has such a devastating effect upon the lungs. There's a real dearth of good men, and the result is that labour is both scarce and dear, thus making the finished articles so expensive as to be out of reach for many purposes. A new industry is therefore brought into being to cut out all the unnecessary and costly labour, just as the making of artificial silk has come to the fore. So the misnamed artificial stone trade is coming forward with leaps and bounds. I say it is misnamed because there's nothing artificial about it. It is merely a new way of using real stone without putting all the hard labour into it which was formerly required. We've therefore given it a better name, that of cast stone. Properly and scientifically made, cast stone is superior to the ordinary stone, quarried, dressed and carved to shape. I call my own particular variety Bettner stone, because I contend it is better than the natural stone, having all its advantages and none of its disadvantages. We all know what dreadful trouble there has been with the large public buildings in London owing to the deterioration of the stone, and we are told this is due to not being placed on its natural bed. We have nothing of that kind to contend with cast stone. The stone is quarried anywhere, anyhow, and thrown into the crusher, then thoroughly mixed with all its adhesive agents, thus making it equally strong and giving the stone, when finished, the ability to bear the strain in any part, to say nothing of the steel reinforcements which are introduced into it. Again, we are all bound to admit that the cement-coated grains must adhere more tenaciously and withstand the weather better than the stone in its natural state, bound together by modicums of clay which wash out by rain and are eaten away by the acids of the atmosphere so much more easily than is the cement. Mr. Brady and his assistants at the Government Research Centre at Watford have been making very extensive tests on this point, and although Mr. Brady has not yet issued the results of the test, I think they have found this contention to be borne out. In fact, the director told me they'd been doing a very great deal of experimental work on reconstructed stone and were very delighted with it and enthusiastic as to its future. Like all other new industries, there are scarcely two people who agree upon the exact method of making cast stone. I do not propose to go into tiresome and technical details which would, I am sure, prove totally uninteresting to the readers of the Woman Engineer. I take it they are only concerned with its strength and wearing capacity, how it compares with real stone, and a general idea of how, in my opinion, it should be made and why. In experimenting upon and finally turning out my Bettner stone, I worked up to real stone and not down to concrete. The two things are, or at least I think so, vastly different. The only point that matters in concrete is getting the strength. The dull grey colour is of no moment, nor does it matter that it crazes or is covered with efflorescence. None of this can be looked over in cast stone. This must be perfect in colour, and in every way its appearance should approximate to the natural article. Such a result can only be attained by skilful blending of the crushed stones, several of which may need to be used to obtain the necessary result. If desired, certain colouring matters may be added, but it is expedient to refrain from this as far as possible, as they certainly weaken the finished product. Next, as to crazing, this, in my opinion, is caused by too much water being used. The mixture should be plastic, not wet, as all this excessive moisture has to dry out and causes cracking and crazing in doing so. Experiments have proved that only a small amount of water is necessary to start the cement action, and continually keeping the stones wet, either by placing in tanks of water or storing in a stream curing chamber, will continue until the stone is sufficiently matured to use. One great point in favour of cast stone is that it becomes harder with age, as the cement contained therein is active for a very long time. As previously stated, excessive water contained in the mix only wastes the cement and crazes the stone. Anything that in the making or finishing draws a film of cement to the surface also causes crazing and should be avoided, or some agent used to remove this film and expose the hard stone aggregate beneath. Having dealt with the outside, we now come to the inside. Here again I differ from many in my views, but I contend that the stone should, when fractured, show right through alike, just as natural stone does. We, who are striving to give cast stone its proper place in the buildings of the day, have a much more difficult task than we should have had if certain firms had not poured ordinary concrete into moulds, and then, after it had set, washed it over with various preparations to give it the colour and appearance of natural stone. This covering merely washes and wears off, leaving a dirty, grey, concretey surface beneath. Worse still, some of them have made a core of inferior material, such as slag, cokebreeze, gravel, etc., and then coated it to a depth of about 1 inch with a mixture of crushed stone and cement. This looks very nice, but when it receives a knock after being placed in the building, it breaks away and leaves the horrible cheap centre showing, and the effect is hideous. The outside must be natural stone, and right through the same, so that as in the course of time it is worn away by use, it merely presents the same appearance of that of the quarried and carved stone under similar conditions. To sum up, to be successful in this, as in all things, the substitute must closely, in all ways, approximate to the original article it replaces.